Your salary is rising. Your house is worth more than ever. Your retirement account shows bigger numbers every year, and somehow you feel poorer. This isn't bad budgeting. It isn't inflation returning to normal like the headlines claim. And it isn't a temporary post-pandemic adjustment. What you're experiencing is the opening act of a wealth transfer so massive, so methodical, that most people won't recognize it until their savings buy half of what they expected. This video isn't about economic doom predictions. It's about a 2,000-year pattern that's repeating right now, in real time, with your money. Let me show you exactly how it works. December 20th, 2024. The Federal Reserve quietly releases its latest money supply data. M2, the broadest measure of money circulating in the American economy, stands at $21.2 trillion. In January 2020, before the world changed, that number was $15.4 trillion. In less than 5 years, the United States created $8 trillion out of thin air. Picture that number on screen. 800,000. Now picture this. The entire U.S. money supply in 1980 was $1.6 trillion. We printed 3.5 times the entire 1980 economy in just 5 years. And yet somehow the crisis everyone predicted never arrived. Marcus Chen still remembers the exact satisfying moment he pulled up his Fidelity app in March 2024. The 34-year-old software engineer from Austin watched his 401k cross $380,000 for the first time, up from $240,000 just 3 years earlier. He screenshot the number, texted his wife, and thought about maybe upgrading their Honda Accord. Everything the experts warned about: inflation, collapse, dollar destruction. None of it happened to him. His portfolio was up 58%. His house appreciated $190,000. By every metric Marcus could measure, he was winning. 800 miles away, in a small apartment in Cincinnati, Dorothy Brennan was doing math that made no sense. The 67-year-old retired postal worker had done everything right. 41 years of service. Pension of $840 per month. Social Security of $1,920. She'd saved an additional $145,000 in her TSP account, which had grown to $168,000 since retirement. On paper, she was fine. But Dorothy found herself standing in the grocery aisle at Kroger Calculator app, open, trying to figure out how a cart that cost $127 3 years ago now rang up at $189. The same items, the same brands, the same store. Her pension hadn't changed. Her Social Security adjustment didn't cover the gap. And that growing retirement account she'd started withdrawing from it to cover the monthly shortfall. Her savings were growing, and she was getting poorer. Here's what most people get wrong about inflation. They think it's a single number. The 3.4% the government announces, the 9% peak we hit in 2022. They think when that number falls, inflation ends. But inflation doesn't work like that. Inflation is cumulative. That 9% didn't disappear. It baked into prices permanently. Then 6% stacked on top. Then 3.4% more. The dollars you're holding today buy roughly 23% less than they did in January 2020, and that's using official numbers. Real inflation in rent, groceries, insurance, healthcare, that's running 30 to 40%. The money was printed. Where did it go? This is where the story splits into two Americas. The first wave of that $5.8 trillion hit asset prices. Stocks up 60% since 2020. Housing up 47%. Anyone holding assets before the printing started watched their net worth explode. Jonathan Hartley III manages a family office in Greenwich, Connecticut. Old money, the kind that's been compounding since his great-grandfather bought Manhattan real estate in the 1920s. In 2020, the Hartley family portfolio stood at approximately $340 million. heavily weighted in commercial real estate S&P index funds and private equity. By late 2024, that same portfolio had crossed $580 million. Jonathan didn't work harder. He didn't innovate. He didn't create anything new. He simply owned assets when the money printer turned on. The second wave hit consumer prices. Groceries, gas, rent, insurance. Everything the middle class spends money on. Anyone depending on wages watched their purchasing power evaporate. Maria Santos knows this arithmetic intimately. The 42-year-old elementary school teacher in Phoenix saw her salary rise from $54,000 to $61,000 over 4 years, a 13% increase she was initially proud of. Then she did the math her union rep suggested. Her rent had increased from $1,450 to $2,100. Her car insurance doubled. Groceries up 40%. Healthcare premiums up 35%. That 13% raise translated to roughly $2,800 less in real purchasing power than she had in 2020. Maria got a raise every single year, and every single year she fell further behind. So here's the question nobody in Washington wants to answer if the first $5.8 trillion caused 40% real inflation in essentials while making asset holders 60% richer. What happens when we print the next $15 trillion? Because that's not a hypothetical. That's the Congressional Budget Office projection through 2030, and it's probably conservative. The third wave, the one that destroys the middle class entirely, hasn't hit yet. It's still building. And the math behind it is so simple, so inevitable, that once you see it, you'll wonder why no one talks about it on the evening news. The United States government currently owes $36.2 trillion. This year alone will pay $1.13 trillion just in interest on that debt. Not paying it down, not reducing it, just interest. That's more than the entire defense budget. More than Medicare. More than we spend on education, infrastructure, and veterans combined. And here's the part that should keep you up at night, that interest payment is growing faster than tax revenue, which means next year we'll borrow money to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed, and the year after that, and the year after that. There is no plan to pay this off. Not from either party, not from any economist with actual influence, because there is no path to paying it off. There's only one way out. And it's the same way out every empire in history has taken when the math stopped working. What I'm about to show you is a pattern. It's repeated without exception for over 2,000 years. Rome followed it. Weimar Germany followed it. And right now, in real time, America is following the exact same script. The only question is whether you'll recognize it before your savings become the sacrifice. Every currency collapse in history follows the same 4 stages. No exceptions in 2,000 years. Once you understand this pattern, you'll see it everywhere, including in the Federal Reserve announcements you scroll past without reading. Stage 1. A nation establishes trusted currency backed by something real. Gold, silver, commodities. The backing creates trust. Trust creates economic expansion. People save in the currency because it holds value. This stage lasts decades, sometimes centuries. Stage 2. The government faces mounting costs it cannot afford. Wars, welfare programs, political promises, corrupt payments to maintain power. Tax revenue isn't enough. Borrowing has limits, so the government does what desperate governments always do. They debase the currency. They reduce the precious metal content. They print more paper. They promise it's temporary. They promise nothing has changed. Stage 3. The debasement accelerates beyond control. Inflation rises. Currency collapses. And here's the critical part. The middle class holding wealth in the currency gets obliterated. Meanwhile, those closest to money creation survive. They consolidate. They buy assets from desperate sellers at prices that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Stage 4. A new currency is introduced. Wealth has transferred from millions to thousands. The system restarts, and the people who lost everything never see it coming because each stage blends into the next. Think of it like a poker game where the house secretly adds chips to certain players' stacks between hands. The game looks fair. The rules appear unchanged, but the math has shifted. By the time you notice, you've already lost. Let me show you this pattern in action. Rome, 64 AD. The city is burning. Emperor Nero needs money desperately. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, had contained 95% pure silver under Augustus. Nero reduced it to 80%. Most Romans didn't notice. The coin looked identical. It spent the same way. But it contained 15% less silver. Lucius Caelius was a grain merchant in Ostia, Rome's port city. In 150 AD, he'd accumulated 100,000 denarii over 30 years of careful trading. Enough to buy a productive farm outside the city, retire comfortably, and leave something for his sons. He kept his savings in coins locked in a strong box he checked every month. The weight never changed. The silver still gleamed. By 250 AD, 100 years later, that same strong box of coins, if his grandchildren still had it, would buy a single loaf of bread. The denarius had fallen to 2% silver. Prices had exploded 1,000%. 3 generations of savings evaporated. Here's what most people get wrong about currency debasement. They imagine it happens all at once. A single announcement, a dramatic collapse. But that's not how empires fall. Rome debased its currency over 200 years. Each reduction was small. Each emperor had a reasonable excuse. And by the time ordinary Romans understood what was happening, the transfer was complete. Senators with land estates had consolidated wealth. The middle class had been annihilated. And within 2 centuries, the Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely. Now, fast forward to Weimar Germany, 1921. Same pattern compressed into 2 years. Margareta Weber kept a small leather notebook where she recorded every household expense. Her husband Franz worked as a bank clerk in Munich, earning a respectable salary of 3,000 marks per month. In January 1921, she noted with satisfaction that they'd saved 100,000 marks, enough for 5 years of comfortable living, maybe a small cottage near her mother in Bavaria. The notebook still exists. Her granddaughter donated it to a museum in Berlin. You can see Margareta's handwriting change over 23 months. January 1922. Bread costs 3 marks. July 1922. Bread costs 100 marks. Her entries become frantic. January 1923. Bread costs 700 marks. By November 1923, she'd stopped writing prices. The last entry simply says, "The money is gone. All of it. We have nothing." In November 1923, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Margaret's lifetime savings couldn't buy a postage stamp. But here's the twist nobody mentions when they tell the Weimar story. Not everyone lost. Industrialists like Hugo Stinnes borrowed millions of marks to buy factories, mines, and real estate. When hyperinflation hit, he repaid those loans with worthless currency. His debt evaporated. His assets remained. By 1924, Stinnes controlled over 1,500 companies and was the richest man in Germany. The inflation didn't destroy wealth. It transferred wealth, from savers to borrowers, from the middle class to the asset-owning elite. So why does this keep happening? Why do governments always choose debasement? Because it's invisible. Raise taxes by 20% and you'll face riots in the streets. Cut Social Security by 20% and you'll lose the next election. But inflate the currency by 20%. Most people will blame grocery stores for high prices. They'll blame oil companies. They'll blame the other political party. They'll blame anyone except the mechanism that's actually responsible. Remember Dorothy Brennan from Cincinnati, the retired postal worker watching her grocery bills climb while her pension stayed flat. She's living through stage 3 right now, the same stage that destroyed Lucius Caelius in Rome, that wiped out Margaret Weber in Munich. The numbers are different. The currency is different. The mechanism is identical. August 15, 1971. President Nixon appears on television and suspends dollar convertibility into gold. For 27 years, since Bretton Woods, the dollar had been backed by gold at $35 per ounce. After that broadcast, the dollar became pure paper. A promise backed by nothing but the government's word. Robert Kiyosaki was 24 years old, just back from Vietnam, watching that broadcast in a bar in Honolulu. He didn't understand what he was seeing. Neither did most Americans. But his rich dad, as he later called him, phoned the next morning with 4 words, "Buy real estate now." Within 9 years, gold went from $35 to $850 per ounce. Real estate tripled. Stocks eventually recovered. Anyone holding dollars watched purchasing power evaporate. Anyone holding assets built generational wealth. That was America entering stage 2. We've been in it for 53 years. The debasement has been slower than Rome, slower than Weimar. But the math is accelerating. And what took Rome 2 centuries and Germany 2 years might take America 2 decades. The difference is the scale. Rome's currency collapse affected the Mediterranean world. Weimar's collapse affected one nation. America's dollar is the global reserve currency. When this pattern completes, it won't just transfer wealth within one country. The question is no longer whether the pattern will repeat. The question is how fast, and whether the next phase has already begun. The pattern has repeated for 2,000 years. Rome, Weimar, Nixon's America. The question is no longer whether it will happen again. The question is whether the next phase has already begun. Let me show you exactly where we are right now. Not theory, not projection, the actual numbers the government publishes but hopes you never read. December 2024. National debt, $36.2 trillion. Annual deficit, $1.9 trillion. Interest payments on that debt, $1.13 trillion per year. Let that number sit for a moment. $1.13 trillion. Just in interest. Not paying anything down. Not reducing the principal by a single cent. Just the cost of servicing what we already owe. For context, imagine a line of $1 bills stretching from Earth to the Sun. That's about 93 million miles. Now imagine 12,000 of those lines. That's what we pay in interest every single year. Here's the first number that should terrify you, that $13 trillion in interest is now larger than the entire defense budget. Larger than Medicare. It's the second biggest line item in the federal budget behind only Social Security, and it's growing faster than anything else. Now here's the second number, the one that reveals the trap. Total federal revenue in 2024 was $4.9 trillion. Total federal spending was $6.8 trillion. Mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest payments consumed $4.2 trillion. That's 86% of all tax revenue going to programs the government cannot legally cut without an act of Congress. The government has 3 options. Only 3. Option 1, cut spending. To balance the budget, you'd need to eliminate the entire Defense Department. All of it. Every soldier, every ship, every plane. Then eliminate all discretionary spending. Education, infrastructure, veterans benefits, scientific research. All of it. Gone. And you'd still run a deficit because interest payments keep growing while you're cutting everything else. Option 2. Raise taxes. You'd need a 40% increase across the board. The median American family earning $75,000 would pay $9,000 more per year. Political suicide. It will not happen. Option 3. Print money. This is the only option. This is what they're already doing. And this is what nobody on the evening news will explain to you. The Federal Reserve currently holds $4.8 trillion in Treasury bonds. When the government needs to borrow money and there aren't enough buyers, the Fed creates new dollars out of nothing and uses them to purchase government debt. This is called debt monetization. This is the money printer, and it's running right now. Pause for a moment and consider what this means. The government borrows money it cannot repay. The Federal Reserve creates money that didn't exist to buy that debt. The new money enters the economy and dilutes the value of every dollar already in circulation. Your savings, your salary, your retirement account, all of it loses purchasing power so the government can continue spending money it doesn't have. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is the published mechanism. It's on the Federal Reserve's own website. But here's what most people get wrong. They think this is incompetence. They think if we just elected better leaders or made smarter policies, we could fix it. They're wrong. This isn't a bug. This is the design. Because inflation is the only tax that doesn't require a vote. Remember Marcus Chen from Austin? The software engineer watching his 401k hit $380,000. He thinks he's winning. But let me show you the math Marcus doesn't see. His portfolio grew 58% since 2020. Sounds great, but his purchasing power, what that money actually buys, grew only 18% after adjusting for real inflation. Meanwhile, his salary increases averaged 4% annually, while his rent increased 7%. His insurance increased 12%, and his grocery bills increased 9%. Marcus's net worth is higher than ever. And he's falling behind every single month. Now, let me show you who's actually winning. Jennifer Walton manages a family trust in Palm Beach. Old money diversified across commercial real estate, private equity, and index funds. In March 2020, when the Federal Reserve announced unlimited quantitative easing, her phone rang before the press conference ended. Her wealth advisor had 4 words: "We're going all in." The trust deployed $40 million into distressed assets over the next 6 weeks. Commercial properties from struggling businesses. Stocks at pandemic lows. Convertible debt from companies desperate for liquidity. By December 2024, that $40 million had become $94 million, a 135% return in less than 5 years. Jennifer didn't work for that money. She didn't create jobs or build products or solve problems. She simply understood what the Fed announcement meant. Unlimited money printing meant unlimited asset price inflation. She positioned herself on the right side of the transfer. Marcus Chen positioned himself on the wrong side. Both of them think the system is working exactly as designed. Only Jennifer is correct. Here's the rage moment. Here's the part that should make your blood boil. In April 2020, while 22 million Americans lost their jobs in a single month, while families lined up at food banks for the first time in their lives, while small businesses that took generations to build closed permanently, the Federal Reserve was conducting the largest wealth transfer in American history. They created $3 trillion in 8 weeks. That money didn't go to the unemployed. It didn't go to struggling families. It went into financial markets where it inflated asset prices owned predominantly by the top 10% of households. Thomas Reeves owned a printing shop in Milwaukee for 31 years. Third-generation family business. Employed 12 people. When the shutdown orders came, he applied for PPP loans, EIDL loans, every program he could find. He waited 9 weeks for approval. By the time the money arrived, he'd already missed 2 months of rent. Lost his key accounts to competitors who stayed open and had to let go of employees he'd known for decades. The printing shop closed in August 2020. Thomas sold the equipment for pennies on the dollar to a private equity firm that was buying distressed businesses across the Midwest. That firm was funded by a credit facility backed by Federal Reserve lending programs. Thomas lost his grandfather's business. The private equity fund that bought his equipment returned 47% to investors that year. This is not a market failure. This is the market working exactly as the rules allow. The question is, who wrote the rules? Let me give you the timeline of what comes next. This isn't prediction. This is the Congressional Budget Office's own projections extended to their logical conclusion. 2025 to 2027. Annual deficits exceed $2 trillion consistently. Interest payments approach $1.5 trillion. Foreign buyers, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, continue reducing Treasury purchases. The Fed increases bond buying from $200 billion annually to $500 billion. M2 money supply grows to $23 trillion by end of 2027. 2028 to 2030. Interest payments hit $2 trillion annually. That's 40% of all tax revenue going just to interest. Deficits hit $2.5 to $3 trillion. The Fed buying $800 billion in treasuries annually. M2 hits $26 trillion. Real inflation, not the CPI number, the actual cost of living, averaging 8 to 12% annually. Wages growing 3 to 4%, the gap widening every month. 2031 to 2033. The Social Security Trust Fund depletes. Benefits automatically cut 21% unless Congress acts. Congress won't cut benefits before an election. They'll print money to cover the shortfall. Medicare Trust Fund depletes. Same solution. Combined, these require $500 billion in additional annual spending with no corresponding revenue. Remember Dorothy Brennan, the retired postal worker doing math in the Kroger aisle. By 2033, her pension buys 40% of what it buys today. Her Social Security either gets cut or gets inflated away. Her savings, the $168,000 she thought would last through her final years, purchases what $65,000 purchases now. Dorothy did everything right. She worked 41 years. She saved. She followed every rule. And the rules changed after she stopped working. Here's the direct address moment. Look at the financial situation of someone you love. A parent on fixed income. A sibling just starting their career. A friend who keeps their savings in a bank account earning 4% while real inflation runs 8%. They're losing ground every single day. They don't know it yet. By the time they figure it out, the transfer will be complete. The national debt cannot be repaid. The math doesn't work. There is no combination of spending cuts and tax increases that produces a balanced budget while maintaining the social programs Americans depend on. The only way out is inflation. Sustained, deliberate middle-class destroying inflation that will transfer $20 to $30 trillion in real wealth from savers and wage earners to asset holders and the government over the next decade. This isn't a prediction. This is the only remaining option. And the people who will be destroyed by it are the same people who've been destroyed every time this pattern has repeated. Margaret Weber, keeping her notebook in Munich. Lucius Caelius, counting coins in Ostia. Dorothy Brennan doing math in Cincinnati. Different centuries. Different currencies. Identical outcome. The question isn't whether this happens. The question is what it looks like when it's finished. The question isn't whether this happens. The question is what it looks like when it's finished. And the answer is simpler and more brutal than most people expect. It doesn't look like collapse. It doesn't look like bread lines or bank runs or currency printed on toilet paper. That's what most people get wrong about modern currency destruction. They're watching for Weimar. They're watching for Venezuela. They'll never see it coming because it won't look like that. It looks like your life getting slightly harder every year for a decade. It looks like working longer hours for the same standard of living. It looks like your children unable to afford what you took for granted. It looks like retirement pushed back 5 years, then 10, then indefinitely. It looks like slow suffocation disguised as normal life. Let me show you what the next decade looks like for two Americans starting from the same place. Kevin Morrison is 38 years old, a logistics manager in Indianapolis, earning $82,000 annually. His wife Sarah teaches 3rd grade, earning $48,000. Combined household income, $130,000. Their net worth in January 2025 $340,000. A house worth $285,000, with $180,000 remaining on the mortgage. Retirement accounts totaling $195,000. Savings account with $40,000 for emergencies. Kevin and Sarah are doing everything right. They max out their 401k matches. They don't carry credit card debt. They drive used cars. They cook at home. By every conventional measure, they're winning. Now let me show you Kevin and Sarah in 2034. Their combined income has risen to $178,000, a 37% increase over 9 years. Sounds like progress. But real inflation has averaged 9% annually. Their purchasing power has actually declined 28%. That $178,000 buys what $94,000 bought in 2025. Their house has appreciated to $485,000 nominally. But adjusted for inflation, it's worth $258,000 in 2025 dollars. They've lost real value while watching the number rise. Their retirement accounts show $412,000. They feel wealthy. But that $401,000 purchases what $219,000 purchased in 2025. They've lost 40% of their retirement's real value. Kevin is 47 now. Sarah is 45. They need $1.2 million in 2034 dollars to retire at their current standard of living. They have $412,000. They'll work until they're 70, maybe longer. And every year they wait, the goalpost moves further away. Now let me show you the same decade for someone who understood the pattern. Victoria Chen is a real estate attorney in Chicago. Same age as Kevin, same starting net worth roughly, $380,000 in January 2025. But Victoria's portfolio is structured differently. $180,000 in rental properties, with $540,000 in mortgages against them. $150,000 in broad market index funds. $50,000 in Treasury I-bonds and cash. Victoria understood something Kevin didn't. In an inflationary environment, debt is an asset. By 2034, Victoria's rental properties have appreciated to $1.4 million nominally. Her mortgages still total $380,000 after 9 years of payments, but that $380,000 in 2034 dollars equals just $202,000 in 2025 purchasing power. Inflation ate her debt. Her tenants' rent increases paid her mortgages. Her equity exploded. Her index funds grew to $395,000. Her net worth in 2034, approximately $1.8 million nominal, or $957,000 in 2025 dollars. She more than doubled her real wealth. Victoria didn't work harder than Kevin. She didn't get lucky. She simply positioned herself on the correct side of a transfer that was mathematically inevitable. Kevin positioned himself on the wrong side. Both of them lived through the same decade. One of them will retire at 55. The other will work until he dies. This is the cruelest part of currency debasement. It punishes the people who follow the rules. Save money, lose money. Pay off debt, watch others profit from keeping it. Live within your means, while asset prices rise beyond your reach. Do you know what Japan looks like after 30 years of this pattern? Japan entered its debt spiral in 1990. Government debt to GDP 67%. By 2024, 263%, the highest in the developed world. For 3 decades, Japan has printed money to finance debt it cannot repay. Interest rates held near zero for a generation. The yen has lost 40% of its value against the dollar since 2012 alone. Picture a chart showing Japanese household formation rates from 1990 to 2024, declining steadily like a ski slope. Young Japanese workers can't afford houses. They can't afford children. The average age of first-time homebuyers has risen from 37 to 44. Birth rates have collapsed to 1.2 children per woman, far below replacement level. An entire generation priced out of the life their parents took for granted. This is America's future if the pattern continues. Not collapse, decline, not crisis, erosion. Not a single moment of reckoning, but a generation slowly realizing the promise was broken. Here's the first unexpected twist. Some people see this clearly and are positioning accordingly. Remember Jennifer Walton from Palm Beach, the family trust manager who went all in during March 2020. Her 2034 projection shows the trust at approximately $240 million, up from $94 million in 2024. She'll have transferred more wealth to the next generation than her great-grandparents accumulated in their entire lives. And she'll have done it by understanding a single principle: when governments print money, own what they're printing it to buy. Now here's the second twist, the one that should haunt you. The people being destroyed aren't just the poor. They're the responsible middle class. The Kevin Morrisons who did everything their parents told them to do. Save money. Avoid debt. Live below your means. That advice was correct for 40 years. It became a trap the moment debt exceeded the ability to repay it through growth. Remember Thomas Reeves, the Milwaukee printer who lost his grandfather's business. By 2034, Thomas is 67 years old. He works part-time at a Home Depot. His Social Security after the 2033 benefit adjustment pays $1,640 per month. His wife Margaret's health requires medications that cost $800 monthly, even with Medicare. The savings from selling his business equipment, $47,000, ran out in 2029. Meanwhile, the private equity fund that purchased his equipment has rolled those assets into a larger portfolio that's been sold twice. The original investors received 340% returns over the decade. They've moved on to the next distressed acquisition. They don't remember Thomas's name. They never knew it. This is the transfer mechanism operating at scale. Millions of Thomas Reeves losing everything over decades. Thousands of private equity funds consolidating it. The wealth doesn't disappear. It concentrates. So what does the end state look like? By 2040, the Congressional Budget Office projects national debt at $56 trillion. Interest payments consuming over 50% of tax revenue. The Federal Reserve owning 40% or more of all Treasury bonds outstanding. The dollar significantly weakened against competing currencies. Cumulative inflation since 2020, 300 to 400%. A house that cost $400,000 in 2020 costs $1.6 million in 2040. The median household net worth of $200,000 in 2020 has lost 60% of its purchasing power. A generation of Americans who expected to retire comfortably will work until they physically cannot continue. Meanwhile, households that entered the decade with $5 million or more in assets will have preserved or grown their real wealth. They'll own larger shares of fewer, more valuable assets. The consolidation will be complete. But here's the open loop that matters most. None of this has happened yet. The debt spiral is accelerating. The pattern is repeating. The math is undeniable. But the decade that destroys Kevin Morrison while enriching Victoria Chen hasn't started yet. The transfer that consolidates Thomas Reeves's life work into anonymous private equity returns is still in its early stages. Which means the window to understand this, and position accordingly, is still open. The question is, how much time remains? The window to understand this is still open. The question is, how much time remains? Let me bring this back to where we started. Not to predict the future, but to recognize the pattern that's been repeating since before any of us were born. December 2024. The Federal Reserve publishes M2 money supply data showing $21.2 trillion in circulation. A 38% increase since January 2020. The largest monetary expansion in American history outside of wartime. And somehow, life continues as normal. Markets hit record highs. Unemployment stays low. The headlines move on to the next crisis. This is exactly what Stage 3 looks like from the inside. Remember Marcus Chen, the software engineer in Austin watching his 401k cross $380,000. I want to tell you what Marcus is doing right now in December 2024. He's planning to buy a bigger house. His portfolio is up. His salary increased 6% this year. His wife just got promoted. On paper, the Chen family has never been wealthier. Marcus scrolls past articles about national debt and inflation projections the same way you scroll past weather reports for cities you'll never visit. It doesn't feel relevant to his life. But if you showed Marcus a chart of his real purchasing power, not the nominal numbers, the actual buying power of his dollars, he'd see a line declining 4% every year since 2020. Picture that chart. The blue line of his account balance climbing steadily upward, the red line of purchasing power sliding steadily down, and a widening gap between them that represents everything Marcus thinks he's gaining, but is actually losing. Marcus isn't stupid. Marcus isn't irresponsible. Marcus simply doesn't know what he doesn't know. And by the time he figures it out, the transfer will be complete. Now, let me show you Dorothy Brennan one more time. The 67-year-old retired postal worker in Cincinnati. Dorothy's situation has changed since we first met her. She started doing something she never expected. She's gone back to work. Part-time 3 days a week at a local tax preparation office during busy season. Not because she wants to, because the math stopped working. Her pension still pays $2,840 per month. Her Social Security still pays $1,920. But her grocery bills have risen to $847 per month from $600 3 years ago. Her Medicare supplement premium increased to $289 from $198. Her car insurance doubled after she filed a minor claim. The $145,000 she'd saved is now $121,000, and she's withdrawing $400 monthly, just to maintain the same standard of living she had in 2021. Dorothy watches financial news sometimes. She hears experts say inflation is under control at 3.4%. She doesn't understand why the numbers on TV don't match the numbers in her checkbook. She blames herself for not budgeting better. She started buying store-brand medications instead of name-brand. She canceled the subscription to the Cincinnati Enquirer her husband started in 1978. Dorothy is experiencing stage 3 of currency collapse. She just doesn't have a name for it. Here's the unexpected twist that ties everything together. The pattern connecting Lucius Caelius in ancient Rome, Margaret Weber in Weimar Germany, Dorothy Brennan in modern Cincinnati, and Kevin Morrison in future Indianapolis isn't about economics. It's about information asymmetry. In every currency collapse, the same thing happens. Those closest to the money, creation, understand what's coming. They position accordingly. They buy assets. They take on strategic debt. They convert vulnerable holdings into inflation-protected holdings. And they do it while everyone else is still reading headlines about inflation being transitory and debt being manageable. Hugo Stinnes understood it in 1921. Robert Kiyosaki understood it in 1971. Jennifer Walton understood it in 2020. Victoria Chen understands it today. The question isn't whether you can predict exactly when or how the pattern completes. Nobody can. The question is whether you understand the pattern well enough to ask the right questions about your own situation. Not financial advice, not specific actions, just questions. First, if real inflation runs 8% annually for the next decade while your income grows 3%, what does your life look like in 2034? Run the math. Actually run it. Second, what percentage of your net worth is in assets that rise with inflation versus assets that inflation destroys? Cash bonds and fixed payments lose. Equity real estate and strategic debt win. Where do you sit? Third, if the pattern that's repeated for 2,000 years repeats again, which side of the transfer are you positioned on? These aren't predictions. They're pattern recognition. The same pattern that turned Roman senators into oligarchs while merchants became peasants. The same pattern that made Hugo Stinnes the richest man in Germany, while Margareta Weber lost everything. The same pattern operating right now in real time with your money. Let me be clear about what this video is not. It's not a prophecy. It's not financial advice. It's not a call to panic or a guarantee of collapse. What it is, a map. A recognition that the territory we're entering has been crossed before. That the path governments take when debt exceeds their ability to repay it has been walked by every empire that came before us. And that the people who recognized the pattern early have consistently ended up on the opposite side of the transfer from those who didn't. The national debt stands at $36.2 trillion. Interest payments exceed $1 trillion annually and rising. The money supply expanded 38% in 5 years. The Federal Reserve holds nearly $5 trillion in treasury bonds it purchased with money that didn't exist until they created it. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are published numbers from government sources. The only question is what they mean for your life over the next decade. Rome didn't fall in a day. It debased its currency for 200 years, while citizens went about their daily lives never quite connecting the rising prices to the shrinking silver content in their coins. Weimar didn't collapse in a month. It printed money for 2 years, while families kept faith in a currency that was evaporating in their hands. Nixon closed the gold window 53 years ago, and most Americans still don't understand what changed that night. The pattern doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send warnings. It simply transfers wealth from those who don't see it to those who do. Dorothy Brennan is buying store-brand medications. Marcus Chen is planning a bigger house. Jennifer Walton's trust just crossed $94 million. Thomas Reeves works at Home Depot. Victoria Chen is closing on her 4th rental property. Same economy, same decade, different outcomes. The money you're holding is a claim on future goods and services. The question is whether that claim will be honored at full value, partial value, or not at all. Unpayable debt never gets paid. It gets inflated away. And you're holding the currency that's about to be sacrificed to pay the debt.